Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and as requested by you, I'm going to do a quick run through of some of the primary rules differences between Mark III and Mark IV Warmachine, previously Warmachine / Hordes. It's now just Warmachine. If you haven't seen my previous video to this one where I went over sort of all of the business sort of focused or the business side changes that are occurring to the game, Warmachine and Hordes, which is again now just Warmachine, I'll link that somewhere on the screen here. You can go and check that out. This is going to be a quick rundown of some of the larger rules mechanics changes to the actual gameplay of Warmachine. So first off, and again, this is directly from the Privateer Press website. Feel free to go and check it out if you want. It's been out for like a month now, so you've probably already skimmed through these, but for the people that haven't, or for the people that want my take on these rules changes, here we go. So first off, a quick sort of like top header here. All of these changes are designed to speed up gameplay and to slow or to remove anything that slows down gameplay, like out of turn activations or movement or attacks or any type of attack or special action that has lots of sort of rippling triggers that takes a long time to process through. Not necessarily for organized play, although obviously it's a big benefit to organized play, especially when you're playing with stop clocks. But to general gameplay, people I think feel that the game has really sort of slogged on to a point where your average friendly game takes upwards of 3 hours if you're playing an average point set, and people aren't really interested in that. For those of you that don't recall or who weren't around when the game sort of first got kicked off, when Warmachine and Hordes was first a thing, it actually started as just Warmachine, Hordes came out 2 or 3 years later, it was a skirmish size game. It felt like you had maybe a dozen models on the table, maybe a unit or two or three jacks and a warcaster, and that was really all you had. And since then, the game has kind of gone in various directions, and the scale of it has shifted over time to the point where it feels like a much larger army force on the table as opposed to what it felt like back in the day. And I think a lot of people miss that sort of smaller scale skirmish style fast pace action that the original version of the game offered. And I think they're trying to get back to some of those roots with this sort of reset in Mark IV. Anyways, into the rules here. First off, removal of facing. There will no longer be model facing, front arc, back arc, anything like that. Obviously that means rules like 360-degree vision will also be going out the window because all models will have 360-degree vision. They specifically mentioned that they don't like the idea that you have to be like good at geometry and get that sort of 90-degree front arc, or 180-degree front arc, I should say, facing exactly how you like it, to exclude these models, but include these models, and messing with like visual line of sight so that you can make certain attacks work in weird, bizarre ways. They're trying to get rid of anything that has to do with sort of fudging the rules to make them work in an unexpected kind of way, simply because that's how they happen to work together mechanically. So removing facing. On top of that, they're saying, we don't like the idea that we come up with these amazing dynamic sculpted models, a lot of which have awesome poses that overhang the base, and then players have to sort of play with them backwards and say, oh, well, the front arc is the back arc and the back arc is the front arc because my Titan's arms overreach the base a little too much to properly place it so that it can attack your model. So I have to spin it backwards, which looks goofy on a game board. So we'd rather just let you angle it however you like so that it fits and it has 360-degree facing. It has no facing, I should say. Moving on to the next one, removal of free strikes. Again, the mindset is anything that happens out of turn, anything that you do during my turn or I do during your turn, tends to slow the game down because it breaks the flow of things. Free strikes are a cool concept, but in a game where you're following a sort of strict mechanism or set of mechanisms, it can get very sloggy. If you were trying to sort of envision realistic combat, yes, if you tried to turn and dash away from me and we were in a sword fight, I would take a quick jab at you and try to get you on departure. That is realistic. But the idea that I have a line of swordsmen who are all about to engage against another line of swordsmen, and then somebody comes running across the front, and each swordman is going to go, ha, 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 down the line, one at a time as you pass us, or you're going to do this weird like sidestepping maneuver to my side so that you can then leave from this side of the arc so that those three guys can't hit you, as if they're just going to watch you sidestep away like a crab and go, oh, guess we can't reach him. Like, that's just kind of a weird visualization of the kind of things that occur when you have rules like free strikes based on front arcs. And obviously getting rid of arcs in general and facing is obviously going to have an impact on free strikes, so getting rid of free strikes is sort of a natural next step. They have a sort of a detailed comment or note below this section as well. All of these are written out in full detail, but I'm just going to go over them briefly. That states that we not only remove free strikes from the game, but also most of the capacity to attack out of turn. Again, this is trying to remove the complexity of some of the mechanisms that create this sort of like break or indent in the nice flow, this sort of pause in the flow of one player's turn so that another player can interject some random actions. Simplification of unit rules. So this feels like something out of Warhammer 40k or Warhammer Age of Sigmar. At least that's where I first came across this style of unit movement. Basically, they've gotten rid of the concept of a commander or a command range. You simply choose one model within a unit, advance that model as it can legally, so walking, running, charging, what have you, and then all other models in that unit are placed within 2 inches of that model. Now, obviously, this is going to have some impact on how you can place units or how you can place models within a unit. You can't spread them across this massive arc to cover a huge line because they all have to be within 2 inches of the one model that you advanced sort of using a measuring tape or correctly or per the normal advancement rules. All the rest sort of just teleport to within 2 inches of that model. Not within 2 inches of each other. So you can't daisy chain off of that model for like a foot off in one direction. Granted, you couldn't really do that in Mark III either, but you get what I'm saying. The amount of space that a unit can fill up is definitely going to be smaller because of how tightly they need to move now. However, that speed with which you will be able to move a unit during your turn will save a lot of time. You're basically just going to move that one guy with a measuring tape, and then everybody else just goes bloop, 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 and you all sort of just catch up. So that's a nice little mechanic there. I like that. As I've said before, I like pretty much all of these rules changes. I just feel like it is quite a drastic shift, and it's probably going to bother a lot of people who have collected an army and built up a strategy and a mindset using very sort of standard rules that this game has always utilized, which are now going right out the window, and that's going to drastically alter how the game plays, how it looks, how it feels on the table. Another quick sort of like sub note that they have here, although the reduced unit sizes, which we'll get to in a minute, affects the damage output and capability of a unit, this change to their movement and rules interactions have given them a very sort of fluid role in the game. They can shift around the board very quickly. They use the term like Quicksilver here, makes them very hard to pin down, and they can use their numerical superiority against other models. Again, no free strikes, right? No facing. Yes, you have to move within 2 inches of the one model that you advance, so you do sort of blob up a bit more, but then you can just shift on your next turn to wherever else you want to be. No free strikes, it doesn't matter. You're here, you're there, you're all over the place. That's sort of what units are meant to do now. Whereas something like a Jack or a Beast, I'm assuming, is going to be this powerhouse that sort of just like plows up the field, picks its spot, and gets into like a boxing match with another heavy. These units are going to be slipping here and slipping there. They're going to be all over the place because nothing really holds them down. Again, a drastic change to how the game has worked in the past, because you have units like shield walls and pikemen that are very much meant to stand in one spot and hold down a zone or take care of a territory that you're fighting over for control points. That's no longer going to be the case. That's not going to be what units are used for anymore. They're meant to shift around and do all kinds of slippery things on the battlefield. That's going to make units that did do that sort of stand out less, because now everybody can do that. So again, that's going to drastically shift what units you really care about, because they will no longer stand out for those reasons. They'll have to stand out for new reasons in this new rule set. AOEs and spray attacks have been simplified. These rules basically came straight from Warcaster, their sort of neo-mechanica futuristic sci-fi game that they ran that I'm not a huge fan of. I wanted to be a huge fan of. It kind of flopped on its face as far as I'm concerned. Basically, an AOE is now more of a static effect. It's not, I'm going to launch an AOE attack at you, think of something with like a blast radius, and if it hits you, great, and then it'll hit certain models within a certain range of you based off of how big the blast is, and if I miss, it'll deviate in a random direction and then land blast attacks on those models should it land on top of anybody. That's what it used to do. There's a lot of randomization in that. There's a lot of additional dice rolling, a lot of stuff that slows down play, right? And then you have to sort of lean over the table with the template. Are they in? Are they not in? It's always kind of a little hard to tell. You've got to call a judge over. Now we're slowing gameplay even more. Obviously, they're trying to get away from a lot of this. They state they're trying to get away from templates entirely, and it seems like they have. So blasts will now simply be, if I hit you, a certain number of models within X range of you, which will be clearly stated on the attack. It will say additional blast targets X, so like 2 additional blast targets. And it will also state exactly what blast damage is. It's not simply half of the power of the weapon. rounded up, I believe it was, or rounded down, one or the other. But it's not simply half of the damage. Now, a weapon will have a specific POW and a specified blast damage, which could be more than half, less than half, we don't know, and a specific number of additional models that are hit if the target is directly hit. Now, if the target is not directly hit, the only target that takes blast damage is the target that you were making the attack against. No additional models will take any blast damage. So it's either you hit the target that you're shooting at, and a specific number of models adjacent to that target take a specific amount of blast damage, no rolling dice, no randomization, no deviation, or you miss your target, and that target takes the blast damage denoted on the attack, and that's it. So blast attacks essentially are a touch weaker, but what they really are is more specific and more defined. There's much less randomization going on there, much less need to make additional rolls and measurements and things like that. So a faster type of attack that has roughly the same effect in a sort of representation style as to what it's supposed to be: a bomb, a grenade, some kind of a blast shell. Then beyond that, we have spray attacks. Spray is also used a template. In the past, you would have to target a model, center the spray on that model from you to that model, and then all models that the spray touches, you would make additional spray attacks against. You would ignore things like cover, concealment, yada yada. Now, and again, this comes straight from Warcaster, you draw a straight line out from your model's base up to the measurement at the length of the spray attack. So if it's an 8-inch spray attack, you measure a straight line out 8 inches from your base. Again, no more facing, so you can do this in any direction. And any model's base that line overlaps, I don't think you actually have to declare a target. I think it's just measure a direction that many inches from your base in a straight line. Any enemy model or any model that base over, or that line overlaps its base, you make an attack roll against to see if you hit. So a much more simplified spray, a much more versatile spray, I would say, because you don't have to pick a target, or at least it doesn't seem like you have to pick a target. I could be getting that wrong. But if that's the case, it makes it much easier to sort of like pick the perfect line to catch as many model bases as possible and get as many hit rolls off of that as you can. And much faster, because no templates, no checking, is it in, is it out, that kind of weirdness. Moving on from that, Warjack and Warbeast customization. We've already talked about this a bit, but basically the fact that you can choose what weapons they have and what cortex they have allows you to customize the Warjack. I feel like they're putting a lot of emphasis on the Warjacks and the Warcasters and the Warbeasts. Warcasters and Warlocks, I'm going to start using this term now, are simply referred to as commanders or command models. So let's just go with that. So your commanders are going to get a lot more powerful, and your Warjacks and Warbeasts are going to get a lot more powerful, and your units have a completely different sort of role in the game. So some very, very different vibes going to be happening in Mark IV as far as how things work and how the game flows. But Warjacks and Warbeasts getting more powerful, good, as they should. They're sort of where the name of the game came from, right? Warmachine, Hordes, now just Warmachine. It should really focus around the war machines, right? So awesome there. Then racked spells, again, we already talked about this, but Warcasters, Warlocks, Commanders, command models are going to have a semi-customizable spell list. They're going to have a handful of spells that are permanent, and then a handful of spell slots that you can fill out with spells sort of specific to that faction or specific to that army. And that's cool because, again, it adds versatility and power and customization to those models. Command cards. You can have a hand of 5 command cards, or you're going to have a hand of 5 command cards. These are sort of mini feats, but they're even less than mini feats. They're going to allow you to do things like give a unit Pathfinder for 1 turn, or give a unit magical attacks to their weapons for 1 turn. Small sort of buffs, almost like mini spells that you can activate at one point throughout the game, and I believe they're 1 use only. I don't know if you have to have a hand of 5. You can have a hand of 5, I believe, is how it's played. But so you're going to have those sort of built into the game now. And again, some of those will likely have a point cost to them and will be sort of more faction or army specific. I don't think they're going to have those released yet right off the bat. They're going to have sort of a general pool of cards you can choose from, but command cards, that's going to be a thing. Assassination versus execution mode. Now, this is a weird style of gameplay that they've chose to make optional in the game. Assassination mode, Assassins were originally what assassins were called. Assassination mode versus execution mode is, do you want to play regular Warmachine, where you've got an objective or the option to wipe out your opponent's commander, which is what we're going to call them now, command model. Do you want that sort of standard traditional gameplay mode, or do you want to play execution mode? Now, in execution mode, your command model, your commander, cannot be killed by anything other than the other player's command model. So if I have a Warcaster and you have a Warcaster, your Warcaster is the only thing that can kill mine, and my Warcaster is the only thing that can kill yours. And same thing with it's a Warlock, Warcaster, Warlock, whatever. Now, you sort of have like an altered state that you go into when you take enough damage to die, but the killing blow wasn't dealt by an opponent's model that could kill you, which is only Warcaster, Warlock command models. The state that you go into is very poorly named, in my opinion. It's called vulnerable. When you go into vulnerable, you basically drop to 0 hit points, and all of your upkeep spells immediately expire, and you can no longer be harmed by non-commander models. So the idea that being versatile essentially makes you immortal and unharmable except for one model on the opponent's side of the field, that's a strange term to choose, vulnerable. When you're in the least vulnerable state of the entire game, literally nothing can even hurt you. On top of that, quick little note here, command models, Warcaster, Warlock, if you're using something like a heal ability with your Focus or Fury to sort of like charge up your armor, or with whatever ability that Warlocks had, I forgot what it was called, Blood Magic or something like that, where you can spend one of your Focus or Fury points to regain hit points to yourself. Warlocks could also do it to their beasts. If you're using that ability, it's not 1 point healed per point spent. It's 5 points healed per point spent. So it's a much more powerful ability to regenerate yourself, and this is only during execution mode. This is not during standard assassination mode gameplay, sort of the traditional style of gameplay that we're used to, where anybody can kill your Warcaster or your Warlock. So it's interesting they decided to call it vulnerable. It's an interesting play style. I'm curious how often people are going to want to play this way, because it basically turns the game into a grinding attrition. Players are just going to stomp their armies down into the dirt until it's just commander versus commander, and then one's going to kill the other. At least I think that's how a lot of games will end up sort of turning out. Sure, you're going to use other models to grind your opponent's commander health as low as possible, but the fact that they can spend a single point and regain what's probably a third of their hit points, it's going to be hard to keep them down. And then once they're down, once you have them vulnerable, nothing in your army can do anything to them, really, except other than your commander model. So it's a very strange style of gameplay. That heal mechanic, though, is insane. That's interesting. And again, only in execution mode. In regular gameplay mode, that 1 for 5 conversion does not apply. Then we've got removal of theme forces. I don't even know why this needed to be stated. We're playing armies within factions now, armies being subsets of factions. That's what a theme is, right? It's not that we got rid of theme forces, it's that we permanently baked them into the game. That's all you can play now, and they're called armies. So sure, you got rid of theme forces, but really you didn't. You sort of institutionalized theme forces. And then we've got models can only attack enemy models. Again, this is them trying to get rid of rules that were being manipulated by players in a way that was never intended for them to be used, because rules as written allows you to do some funky stuff sometimes, depending on whether or not it was caught during the play testing of the game, and whether or not it can be errated on the fly without breaking a bunch of other stuff. One of the things that players have always used is the ability to attack their own models in certain ways to allow them to get attack effects or attacks like blast damage off on other models, on opponents' models. You can no longer make any attacks against your own models. Only enemy models can be targeted. Integration of Hordes into Warmachine. So basically they've pulled or converted all of the Hordes specific rules into Warmachine. Again, this is something that they just had to do because they're renaming the game, so you can't really have a completely different rule set for A and B when A and B are now the same thing. It's not that Hordes is gone. Again, there are still a different sort of type of gameplay or mechanics that are going to be used for that style of army, or at least I don't believe it's gone. But they had to integrate things into sort of a common terminology and language set. So like I had mentioned, it says here, the rules shared by the two games, allowing us to streamline the rules shared by the two games, but also the language surrounding, for example, Warcasters and Warlocks, now collectively known as commander models. Stuff like that. Moving on, more powerful Warjacks and Warbeasts. Again, this is something that I was talking about earlier, but basically just bringing them up in their ability to do damage and to be the powerhouses that they're supposed to be in the game, in the fluff, is the right way to go. One of the big actual rules changes here is that a Warjack or Warbeast will be able to attack with all of its weapons each turn, ranged and melee. There are no longer rules saying that you have to choose one set or the other set and only attack with those. And then maybe if you have a special ability, you can sort of attack with both in the same turn. Now all Warjacks and Warbeasts can attack with all of their weapons in the same turn. Streamlining of stats. apologize. There's a lot going on here. Some stats they've gotten rid of entirely. For example, strength is just gone. They decided we're not going to use it. We don't need it. Melee weapons now have a straightforward POW. Special attacks like a throw or a slam are going to have a defined sort of set of stats that they're based off of and a set amount of damage that they do using a specific mechanic. They touch on that a little bit in a minute. But strength completely out the window. They said we replaced the focus and fury stats with a single stat known as arcane, abbreviated to ARC. Again, that makes sense. They're merging the two games. They need to sort of streamline the language so that it applies for both games. On top of that, you are no longer going to use your now arc to determine things like your spell's range or your control range, which is normally what you would do. You would double your focus or your fury to obtain that number. These numbers are now going to be static set numbers printed on your character sheet. So for example, control range and arcane attack stat are going to be set numbers on your character card, on your stat sheet. It does kind of sound like there's going to be a lot more on your character cards for like Warcasters, Warlocks, Commander models than there was before, because now instead of just having a focus, you need a focus and a arcane attack ability and an arcane range, or a control arcane range, whatever it's going to be. But I think it's the right kind of move, again, to streamline gameplay. You're no longer trying to do this on the fly, quick math. Okay, let's see, my focus is -2, so it's this, and then doubled, so now my control range is that. It starts to get a little, and do you double before or do you double after the deduction? It starts to get a little funky, and you have to keep those things in mind during gameplay as things are shifting around. So just having static numbers is a cleaner, more straightforward way to go, and it also allows them to control and balance the game a lot better. And that's going to come back up in a moment when we talk about movement standardization. Actually, right now, let's talk about movement standardization. So running is now speed plus 5 inches. It's not speed doubled, it's speed plus 5 inches. And again, this is done to sort of mainline or streamline your ability to balance the game, because you don't have to worry about things getting out of hand. Like the fact that if I take a unit and I go, okay, I'd rather have it be a 6 than a 5 on movement, but that means that if it runs, it now goes from being a 10 to a 12. There's a little more add in there than I want there to be. So it scales, not exponentially, but it scales bigger when they run or when they gain the ability to increase their speed or movement and then run. It gets out of hand very quickly. So just making it a static +5 on top of speed is their way of controlling this and making it an easy, understandable thing. What's your speed? 6. Okay, your run is always 5 beyond that, unless of course you're modifying with spells. It also allows them to get rid of the differentiation in-game between speed and movement, which I've always found was a bit silly and annoying to have to keep straight in your head. Speed is how you move. Movement is the act of using your speed to move. Yet somehow they were completely different rules as far as how they were affected by spells and when abilities were applied to them versus not applied. So it's nice that they're taking care of that. Also, they mentioned that as far as, I think I might have missed it earlier. Let me make sure I didn't. Charges, I might have missed the section, or maybe it's going to come up, but when you make a charge, like how the unit moves, you move one model and then all other models basically blip within 2 inches of that model. All models will base their charge attacks off of what models are in melee range of the model that made the charge. So if you have a unit of 6 guys, I think all units now are 6 men plus a standard bearer. I'm pretty sure that's standard throughout the game. Or maybe it's 5 plus a standard bearer. I think it's 6 plus a standard bearer. And there's no up down, there's no max of 10 or by point buying a single model at a time. It's just boom, that's what all units are all the time, unless they're a specialized 3-man unit or something like that. But you pick one model, say you measure out, say it's got a speed of 5, a charge of, I'm going to guess it's still +3, so 8 inches. You measure 8 inches in a straight line from that model to your charge target, and you move that model. Then all other models blip within 2 inches of that model, and now all of those models can make charge attacks against any model that model that actually made the initial movement is within melee range of. So you're not going to be able to wipe out an entire unit that's spread across the field, but at the same time, units aren't really going to be spread across the field as much as they used to be. And there's also a little something about melee range here. So it's a little bit different, but again, it really works with this new style of movement that they're doing, and I think it's going to streamline things quite a bit, just like all the other movement standardization. Increased melee range. So the default melee range is no longer a 1/2 inch, it's an inch. And this again is going to help with the fact that units are a little bit more blobbed now, and with things like when you make a charge, all of the charge attacks have to be based off of that one model's melee range. Well, now if that one model's melee range is an inch, and they got right into a nice little socket between 3 or 4 other models in an enemy unit, then you've got 4 charge charge attacks, which is pretty solid considering your unit is really 6 or 7 guys. So getting 4 charge attacks off in a turn is pretty good stuff. And there might be the ability to make additional charge attacks beyond the ones without the charge bonus. I'm assuming you'll just not get the extra die on damage, but you'll still be able to make attacks. So again, it's different, it's new, but I think it's good. Moving on from that, so that was ½ inch to 1 inch on the melee range. Models are allowed to make ranged attacks while engaged. Now, you will have a penalty. So say, for example, you've got a model that's got a rifle and a short sword. That model will be allowed to use the rifle while engaged in melee. They'll have a -4 to their attack roll. This is coming straight from the Iron Kingdoms RPG before it got funkified in 5th edition, when it was actually Iron Kingdoms the RPG, Full Metal Fantasy. That -4 was always sort of how you could use your ranged attack in melee. Now it states here that that penalty will not be implemented if you have a pistol quality on your weapon. So if you have the pistol special ability on your gun, you don't get that -4 to your attack roll. But the fact that you can always make ranged attacks in melee if you want, that's pretty cool. More crits. So this is an interesting one. I don't know why my throat is like frogging up on me here. I apologize. It's probably very loud. So more crits. They're basically adding more crits to more models and units throughout the game. They sort of want to utilize crits as a little bit of a randomization flavor factor because it's a way of injecting some fluff, some fun, some variation into the game that doesn't really add any additional time. Again, they're trying to remove things that add a lot of time and a lot of sort of chaos to the battlefield. But a crit is pretty straightforward. If I roll to hit and I get doubles, my crit goes off. And my crit effect is a static, sort of consistent effect on the attack. So it's easy to work in on the fly, and it's based on the same die roll that I had to make anyways to hit you. It's not like I'm making additional die roll to see what happens. So that's a nice way to add in some randomization and some flavor without putting any cost on sort of the overall gameplay time. So that's a nice one. Rough terrain. Rough terrain is now a flat -2 to movement. It's not having your movement, so it's easier to work with. Again, anything that required you to do on-the-fly math. Not that they didn't think we couldn't do on-the-fly math, but the fact that they didn't want to have numbers sort of govern themselves, like half this or double that. They want to set static numbers. They switched over to rough terrain just being a flat -2 to movement. Return of elevation. They had gotten rid of the elevation terrain effects on the game, and I think they didn't realize how much of an impact that would have on the type of terrain that was included in games, and they miss having that 3-dimensionality to gameplay, having these nice 3-dimensional elevated pieces of terrain on a table, so they've brought back elevated terrain. Simplified power attacks. This is something that I mentioned earlier, so you have things like throws and slams. The example they gave here is thrown models, for example, no longer deviate or target other models when they are moved. Collateral damage is now based on the base size of the attacking model related to the model suffering the collateral damage. So static controlled values, just keeping everything streamlined and straightforward. Simplification of model rules. Basically, they've gotten rid of a lot of sort of like redundant rules or rules that need to be constantly factored into different actions. They've just built them into the actual stats of the model and the way that the game is played. So a lot fewer rules that you have to memorize and keep in mind when playing the game. And then keywords. Again, here they've modified or removed several keywords from the game to streamline the rule set. Plus, a lot of these no longer made any sense. Like I mentioned, eyeless sight or 360 vision. A lot of these no longer make sense in the setting or in the gameplay because they've added in some de facto rules like no facing and no free strikes. So you can get rid of moves like parry because you don't have to have a rule that says I avoid free strikes or I don't take free strikes when no one takes free strikes. And that's the last rule that they have referenced here. So again, quite a bit of change. If you hadn't played the game before and you're just sort of trying to get into Warmachine now and you're learning about Mark IV and you're just sort of picking it up from scratch, none of this will probably sound crazy to you because a lot of these exist in other large-scale games. A lot of these sound very familiar to your typical role-playing game style rules where you can use ranged weapons in melee, but you have some kind of a penalty, or games like Warhammer Age of Sigmar or 40K where a lot of these movements for your units sound very similar. But to people that are sort of grandfathering themselves in from the past versions of Warmachine and Hordes, Mark, 2 or 3 or first, depending on when you join the game, a lot of this is drastically different, and I like it, but I can certainly see how people wouldn't because it is very, very different than the game that we know. It's going to play very, very different. It's going to feel very different. a lot of people are probably going to be lost when they go through their first few games, because if they're playing against somebody who's already adapted to this new style of gameplay, or if they're playing against somebody who's coming into the game and has only ever learned this style of gameplay, they're honestly going to feel like they're playing against somebody who's playing a different game. Like I'm playing Warmachine and you're playing Malifaux. It's going to feel like you're playing under a completely different rule set, because I haven't yet wrapped my mind around all of the new ability and sort of tactical options that I have with this new rule set. I'm going to forget that I don't take free strikes, right? I'm going to run a unit up and then I'm going to stand there like an idiot and not take full advantage of the fact that I could just run over there and take care of them, and I'm going to let them slip right in and annihilate something that I could have stopped because I could have just walked over there, and I'm going to forget about that. Yeah, after a few games I'm going to catch on, but to factor that into my my strategy, my sort of rolling strategy as the game plays, is going to take some effort, because I'm so used to the fact that a unit is locked down until it is free to move away. Or I'm so used to the fact that I can't use my ranged weapons when I'm in melee, or that my Jack has to choose one set of weapons, melee or ranged, during its activation. Now it can shoot with all of them. Jacks that have multiple ranged weapons and multiple melee weapons are now monsters. And the fact that you can build your Jacks up however you want, because their weapons are interchangeable. I don't know why that word got stuck in my mouth. Or that their cortexes are interchangeable. Their head, which is going to change their special attack abilities and their special actions, and possibly like any kind of interaction with a warcaster, or I should say a command model, that they might have. So there's going to be a lot going on for veteran players of the game to sort of get into their head and to start really working with. And some people are going to like that sort of brave new world, and some people are going to despise it and they're going to walk away from the game. I like all of it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I like the idea of the game getting quicker. I've thought the game's been way too long and bulky and sluggish for quite a while. So the idea that I might have fewer models on the table and that those models will be doing more stuff faster in a more fluid way is just gravy for me. So let me know what you guys think about these down below. I'm curious. Leave a comment. Tell me that I'm completely wrong. Tell me that you agree with me. Just start a conversation about whatever, anything else. I like hearing from you. I like talking to you. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I don't think I'm going to have much more to say on Mark IV until we get some much more grounded, solid information. There's definitely been some news releases that have come out since I did my first video, and since I've done this one, but nothing huge that I'm not following it like very closely to make sure I don't miss a single thing. I'm aware that it's going on. I'm aware that people are play testing it. I'm seeing, that they're releasing pictures and graphics and images of stuff. Not a lot of actual model pictures yet, like actual printed, painted models. A lot of graphical renderings and 3D renderings, which is like, meh, like I don't care. If you release a 3D rendering of a model, to me, you might as well have just shown me a crayon sketched cartoon. Like, it's beautiful. You animate with the best of them. I don't care. That thing doesn't exist. I don't believe that that's real until I see it printed and painted and on a base in someone's hand. And then I'll go, oh wow, look at that beautiful texture. Love the way that they designed this. Look at the curves and the dynamic posing, and that's totally different. You can show me whatever you want on a computer screen. I don't believe it. I don't give a damn, right? So it's interesting they're choosing to go like strictly with 3D rendering releases for now. Also, I've been noticing, I don't know if they're just not putting the effort into them at this phase, but the faces on some of these 3D renderings, again, don't care. They might as well be make-believe. But for what it's worth, the rest of the model seems fully fleshed out, the weapons and the body and the armor and everything like that. The face seems like this like weird sketched on flat, not rendered, non-3D like surface that's just painted onto the front of the model. I don't know why it is. Maybe it's the angle that they're showing them at, or maybe they're just not bothering with faces because that's not the important part of the model yet. Or maybe it's just me and I'm looking at it weird. But yeah, for some reason, the faces just seem like there's nothing there, like there's no effort put in. They just went dot, dot, smirk, little nose, and like that's it. But anywho, yeah, so that's my thoughts on the new rules. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If there's anything specific that you want me to continue to talk about with Mark IV, if you want me to continue to follow news releases, I will. I don't want to turn this into like a Warmachine channel, but like I said, these videos do seem to get a lot more attention than pretty much any other kind of video that I do, other than like woodworking videos, by the way. Guild Ball team, fully painted, nice little dioramic base here. Went with the halflings because they're silly and stupid. Painted them with the new Army Painter speed paints, which I absolutely love. I love painting now. I painted this guy, and I painted this guy, and I'm painting this person. So love the speed painter paints. Also built myself, it's off camera, you can't see it, an Army Painter speed paint holder that holds all of the paints plus all of the entire Army Painter brush line. I'll do a video on that. I'll do a video on this. I'll do a video on the little dice roller tray that I built for my D&D sessions that I've been invited to. So, but yeah, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night.